Hollywood in the 1950s was a dazzling kaleidoscope of dreams and ambition, a place where legends were forged under the relentless glare of Klieg lights. Amidst this glittering firmament, a star was rapidly ascending, his name whispered with admiration and affection, Dean Martin. His charisma was a force of nature, an effortless blend of suave sophistication and approachable charm that captivated audiences worldwide. With a voice as smooth as aged whiskey and a stage presence that made every performance feel like an intimate gathering, Martin wasn't just a singer or an actor, he was an icon in the making, his meteoric rise seemingly ordained by the very gods of entertainment. Yet, before the tuxedos and the sold-out shows, there was Dino Crocetti, a kid from Steubenville, Ohio, who hustled his way through dingy nightclubs, driven by an innate talent and a quiet determination. His genuine nature, a disarming blend of humility and warmth, was a cornerstone of his appeal. He was the guy you wanted to have a drink with, the friend who always had a witty remark, never letting the burgeoning fame eclipse the grounded man beneath. His success felt organic, earned through sheer talent and an authentic connection with his public, a stark contrast to the manufactured personas often paraded across the silver screen. Into this vibrant landscape strode Arthur, a producer whose name echoed with a different kind of power. Arthur was a self-made man, his empire built not on charm or genuine connection, but on a shrewd intellect, an iron will, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. His success was undeniable, yet it carried the faint scent of intimidation, a constant reminder that he saw the world as a chessboard and everyone in it as pawns to be moved. Arrogance was his most prominent accessory, worn with an almost deliberate flourish, a shield against any perceived weakness. He viewed the entertainment industry as a battlefield, and he, Arthur, was its undisputed general. Arthur had initially dismissed Martin's easygoing style as a lack of serious ambition, a superficial facade that would eventually crumble under the true pressures of the business. He saw Martin's relaxed demeanor not as a strength, but as a potential liability, an indication of a man too comfortable to truly strive for greatness. To Arthur, success demanded a visible struggle, a constant grind, and Martin's effortless grace seemed to mock that very philosophy. Their first significant encounter was brief, a whirlwind of studio executives and clinking glasses at a lavish industry party. Arthur, holding court in a corner, watched Martin glide through the room, accepting accolades with a modest smile. As Martin approached to offer a polite greeting, Arthur cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Mr. Martin," he drawled, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible sneer. "It must be wonderful to simply float through life on charm alone. Some of us actually work for our achievements." The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult delivered with practiced condescension. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Martin's eyes, a momentary shadow that quickly vanished. He simply offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the barb, and a polite, "Good evening, Arthur." His voice was calm, his composure unruffled, yet there was a subtle firmness in his tone, a hint of steel beneath the velvet exterior. It was a response that left Arthur momentarily disarmed, expecting perhaps a defensive retort or a flustered retreat. Martin simply moved on, leaving Arthur with a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that his intended slight had somehow missed its mark. Despite Arthur's dismissive attitude, the industry buzz around Dean Martin only intensified. His records climbed the charts, his films broke box office records, and his television appearances garnered unprecedented ratings. He was becoming a phenomenon, an independent force that seemed to operate outside the conventional control mechanisms that producers like Arthur so meticulously wielded. Arthur, accustomed to dictating terms and shaping careers, found Martin's burgeoning influence an irritating anomaly, a challenge to his carefully constructed hierarchy. Then came the announcement, a colossal studio project, a musical epic with a budget that dwarfed anything seen before. The lead role was, inevitably, offered to Dean Martin. And, in a twist of fate that grated on Arthur's nerves, he was assigned as the lead producer. The stage was set. Arthur saw Martin not just as an actor, but as a direct challenge to his authority, a symbol of a new Hollywood he struggled to comprehend, let alone control. The tension, though unspoken, was palpable, a silent battle brewing beneath the glittering surface of Hollywood's grandest illusion. The production of the big-budget film began with an air of forced camaraderie, a thin veneer of professionalism that barely concealed the simmering animosity between Arthur and Dean Martin. It was a critical moment for both their careers. For Martin, an opportunity to solidify his status as a leading man, and for Arthur, a chance to reassert his dominance over a talent he increasingly resented. From the outset, Arthur's tactics became increasingly aggressive, a relentless campaign to assert his authority and undermine Martin at every turn. He saw every interaction as a battleground, every decision an opportunity to belittle the star. Arthur began subtly, questioning Martin's costume choices in front of the wardrobe department, suggesting his lines lacked conviction during rehearsals, and openly criticizing his relaxed approach to long shooting days. These were not constructive criticisms, but rather thinly veiled attacks designed to chip away at Martin's confidence. He would hold impromptu, lengthy meetings with the director and other crew members, pointedly excluding Martin, then make grand pronouncements about the vision for the film, ensuring everyone knew who was truly in charge. Martin, ever the professional, absorbed these slights with a stoic demeanor, his signature smile occasionally faltering, a subtle tension settling around his eyes. The crew, initially confused, soon recognized the pattern, witnessing Arthur's deliberate attempts to diminish Martin's presence and talent. One particularly grueling day, after hours of reshoots on a complex musical number, Arthur decided to escalate his campaign. The set was filled with exhausted dancers, musicians, and technicians, all eager for the day to end. Arthur, having spent the afternoon in his private trailer with a bottle of expensive whiskey, emerged onto the set, his face flushed and his arrogance amplified by the alcohol. He weaved through the crew, his eyes fixed on Martin, who was quietly reviewing his notes with the choreographer. "Martin," Arthur bellowed, his voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the tired crew. All eyes turned to the producer, then to the star. Martin slowly looked up, his expression unreadable. Arthur stumbled closer, pointing a finger at Martin's chest. "You know, I've been watching you all day. All this charm, this effortless act. It's a sham, isn't it?" He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. "You're nothing but a glorified crooner who got lucky. A pretty face with a decent voice, no real talent, no discipline. You're lazy, Martin. Just a lazy, spoiled dilettante coasting on borrowed time." The words struck with the force of a physical blow. The set fell into a stunned, absolute silence. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The air crackled with an unbearable tension. The crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure how Martin, known for his calm exterior, would react to such a brutal, public humiliation. Arthur, emboldened by the silence, smirked, apparently satisfied with the impact of his tirade. He swayed slightly, convinced he had finally put Martin in his place, asserting his absolute dominance. Martin remained motionless for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Arthur. Then, with agonizing slowness, he began to turn, his body rotating deliberately to face the sneering producer directly. The casual posture he usually maintained seemed to tighten, his shoulders squaring, his jawline hardening. As his eyes met Arthur's, a dangerous glint, cold and sharp, flickered within their depths. It was a look that promised a reckoning, a silent declaration that the line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The smiles that usually played around Martin's lips were gone, replaced by a grim, formidable resolve. The entire crew held its breath, bracing for the inevitable explosion, wondering what devastating response would emerge from the man they had only ever seen as effortlessly charming. The stage was set for a confrontation far more intense than any scene they had filmed that day. The air remained thick with anticipation, but the expected explosion never came. Dean Martin, after that chilling glare, simply turned his back on Arthur, resuming his quiet conversation with the choreographer as if the producer's venomous outburst had been nothing more than a fly buzzing in the distance. The crew, bewildered, slowly began to disperse, the tension dissipating into an uncomfortable murmur. Yet, beneath Martin's composed exterior, a deep wound festered. The words, "lazy, spoiled dilettante," echoed in the chambers of his mind, not because he believed them, but because they struck at the very core of his pride, a pride forged in the fires of ambition and resilience. His mind drifted back to his early days, the relentless grind of singing in smoky clubs, the endless nights perfecting his craft, the sacrifices made to climb from obscurity to the dazzling heights of Hollywood. He recalled the lean times, the hunger, the determination that fueled every step of his journey. There was no room for laziness in his past, and certainly none in his present. Arthur's words were not just an insult. They were a blatant dismissal of every struggle, every triumph that had defined his path. The casual cruelty of it stung more than any physical blow. Later that evening, in the quiet sanctuary of his dressing room, Martin confided in his longtime manager and closest friend, Morty. The usual easy banter was absent, replaced by a somber quietude. "He thinks he broke me, Morty," Martin said, his voice low, a rare vulnerability creeping into his tone. He gazed into his whiskey glass, the amber liquid swirling with his unspoken thoughts. "He thinks he won." Morty, a man who had seen Martin through countless ups and downs, simply listened, knowing that his friend needed to process the humiliation in his own way. "But he doesn't understand," Martin continued, a steely resolve returning to his eyes. "You never let anyone diminish your spirit. That's the one thing they can't take from you, not if you don't let them." It wasn't a vow of vengeance, not in the traditional sense, but a quiet, firm commitment to reclaim his dignity, not with a public spectacle, but with strategic precision. He wouldn't stoop to Arthur's level. Instead, he would dismantle Arthur's arrogance piece by piece, not through confrontation, but through calculated action. He began to observe Arthur with a new intensity, noting the producer's habits, his vulnerabilities, the subtle ways his power was maintained. He wasn't looking for a fight, he was looking for leverage. Arthur, meanwhile, remained blissfully ignorant of the storm he had stirred. He strutted around the set the following days, a renewed swagger in his step, convinced that his public dressing down had effectively put Martin in his place. He believed he had asserted his dominance, proving to the entire crew who truly held the reins. He even made a few snide remarks about Martin's sudden quietness, interpreting it as submission rather than a harbinger of retribution. Martin, however, had already begun his subtle campaign. He started cultivating deeper relationships with key figures on the production, the studio head's assistant, the lead costume designer, even a veteran gaffer who had seen countless producers come and go. He listened more, spoke less, and offered genuine support and appreciation, building a quiet network of allies who respected his professionalism and charm. These were not direct attacks on Arthur, but rather a strategic consolidation of his own influence, a silent counter-movement to the producer's bluster. One evening, after a particularly long day, Martin overheard a hushed conversation between two crew members mentioning Arthur's past financial troubles and a particularly nasty dispute with a former business partner. The details were vague, but the mention of a scandalous lawsuit, and questionable accounting piqued Martin's interest. He made a mental note, a tiny seed of information that might, in time, prove invaluable. He wasn't rushing, wasn't acting impulsively. Martin's silence was not weakness. It was the calm before a very precise and utterly devastating storm. The stage was being set for a reckoning that Arthur, in his hubris, could never have foreseen. Martin's professional conduct on set became a masterclass in understated excellence. He arrived early, knew his lines perfectly, and offered suggestions that subtly improved scenes without ever stepping on the director's toes. His performances were consistently brilliant, effortlessly charismatic, making Arthur's earlier accusations of laziness and lack of commitment ring hollow to anyone with eyes and ears. He exuded an aura of calm competence, a stark contrast to the producer's increasingly agitated demeanor. The crew, initially stunned by Arthur's public outburst, now saw Martin's quiet grace and respected him all the more for it. His charm, a natural gift, was now wielded with deliberate precision. He engaged in light-hearted banter with technicians, remembered personal details about their lives, and offered genuine encouragement, slowly but surely swaying the collective sentiment of the production in his favor. Arthur, wrapped in his own self-importance, initially failed to grasp the shifting tides. He noticed small things at first, a certain coolness from the studio executives during routine meetings, a less enthusiastic reception to his pronouncements, fewer sycophantic laughs at his often crude jokes. The deferential nods had become less pronounced, the smiles more forced. He dismissed it as petty jealousy, a natural consequence of his undeniable genius. Yet an unease began to gnaw at him. The air on set, once thick with his unchallenged authority, now felt subtly different, less compliant, almost watchful. Whispers began to circulate, not loud enough to be directly confrontational, but insidious in their persistence. Rumors about Arthur's volatile temperament, his tendency to berate subordinates, and his questionable financial dealings started to gain traction. These weren't direct attacks originating from Martin, but rather the natural consequence of a carefully cultivated network allowing existing truths to surface. Martin's allies, subtly and discreetly, allowed these uncomfortable narratives to spread, amplifying them through casual conversations and concerned glances. A key investor, a man known for his meticulous attention to detail and aversion to scandal, expressed growing concerns about Arthur's management style during a private lunch with the studio head. The investor's words were carefully chosen, but the implication was clear. Arthur was becoming a liability. Feeling the ground shift beneath his feet, Arthur became even more erratic. His outbursts grew more frequent, his demands more unreasonable. He paced the set with a perpetual scowl, barking orders and finding fault in every minor detail. He blamed delays on the crew's incompetence, budget overruns on the director's artistic indulgence, and any perceived lack of enthusiasm on Martin's unprofessional influence. He was a man under siege, but one who refused to acknowledge the true source of the pressure. Martin, meanwhile, continued his work with serene professionalism, a quiet anchor amidst Arthur's rising storm. He didn't need to speak ill of Arthur. The producer was doing an excellent job of self-sabotage. The film production, despite its initial promise, began to suffer minor but noticeable setbacks. Equipment malfunctions became more frequent, scheduling conflicts more complex, and a general air of inefficiency permeated the set. Arthur, refusing to introspect, loudly attributed these issues to a conspiracy against him, further alienating those who might have once offered support. He was oblivious to the fact that Martin, through his calm professionalism and burgeoning network of allies, was indirectly highlighting every single one of Arthur's flaws, without uttering a single public word against him. The producer's empire, built on fear and intimidation, was beginning to show visible cracks. Martin, the quiet observer, held a hidden card, waiting for the opportune moment to play it, a moment that would redefine Arthur's career forever. The film, a sprawling epic that had become a battleground for two vastly different philosophies, was finally nearing completion. The studio, eager to celebrate its anticipated success, and perhaps to smooth over the lingering tensions, scheduled a grand wrap party, an opulent affair designed to project an image of harmony and triumph. It was an event Arthur dreaded and yet craved, a chance to reassert his dominance, to prove that he was still the undisputed king of his domain. He saw it as his opportunity to regain control, to publicly humble Dean Martin one last time, to put the upstart in his place. As the chandeliers sparkled and champagne flowed, Arthur, emboldened by the alcohol and the flickering illusion of his former power, spotted Martin across the crowded ballroom. A cold, calculating gleam entered his eyes. He weaved through the throng, his path purposefully direct, a shark sensing blood in the water. He cornered Martin by a velvet curtain, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet menacing whisper. "Enjoying yourself, Martin. Don't get too comfortable. This town has a way of chewing up pretty faces and spitting them out. Your little act won't last forever. I've seen bigger stars fall, and I've been the one to push them." There was a veiled threat in his tone, a promise of future retribution, a desperate attempt to intimidate. Arthur leaned in, his breath heavy with liquor, his eyes narrowed into slits. "Remember who really runs things around here, Dean. Remember who can make or break a career with a single phone call." Martin, however, remained remarkably calm. His expression was unreadable, a quiet composure that only served to fuel Arthur's frustrated rage. He simply looked at the producer, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his gaze, as if he were looking not at a formidable adversary, but at a man whose desperation was painfully transparent. The air around them seemed to thicken, the ambient chatter of the party fading into a distant hum. Those nearby, sensing the sudden tension, instinctively lowered their voices, their eyes darting between the two men. Then, with a deliberate slowness that spoke volumes, Martin finally delivered his response. His voice was low, almost a murmur, yet it carried an undeniable weight, a resonant clarity that cut through the clamor of the party. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't gesture wildly. His words were precise, measured, and utterly devoid of anger. He simply looked Arthur directly in the eye, a gaze that seemed to pierce through the producer's bluster, and spoke three words, words that were not a question, not an insult, but a statement of undeniable, devastating truth. "You're done, Arthur." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Arthur's face, moments before contorted with arrogance, went slack, then pale. The bluster drained from him, replaced by a look of utter shock, as if he had been struck a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Those within earshot gasped, a collective intake of breath. They understood. Everyone understood. "You're done, Arthur." It wasn't a threat. It was a pronouncement, a cold, unassailable fact delivered with quiet conviction. It was a direct, undeniable challenge to Arthur's authority, a reference to his crumbling reputation, his increasingly erratic behavior, and the subtle rot that Martin had meticulously exposed. In that single pregnant pause, Arthur saw it all. He saw the years of his own arrogance, the countless slights, the intimidation, the fear he had instilled in others. And in Martin's calm, unwavering gaze, he saw a reflection of his own impending ruin. He realized, with a sickening lurch, that Martin had not only seen through him, but had also patiently, strategically orchestrated his downfall. The power he once wielded, the control he so desperately clung to, had evaporated in the space of 3 quiet words. The full weight and consequence of Martin's pronouncement were about to unfold, shattering Arthur's carefully constructed world into irreparable fragments. The game was over, and Arthur had lost. The three words, "You're done, Arthur," reverberated through the hushed ballroom, carrying a chilling finality that transcended sound. They weren't just words. They were a death knell, a prophecy delivered with the quiet authority of a man who understood the intricate dance of Hollywood power. Like wildfire, the pronouncement spread, whispered from ear to ear, gaining momentum and credibility with each retelling. It wasn't just Dean Martin's statement. It was the industry's validation of what many had suspected, but none dared to voice openly. The subtle rumors that Martin's network had so deftly woven about Arthur's volatile temperament and questionable ethics now gained undeniable, irrefutable weight. Studio executives, who had grown increasingly wary of Arthur's erratic behavior and declining returns, found their concerns solidified. Investors who had privately questioned his judgment and the financial stability of his projects now saw their fears confirmed. The protective shield of power, once impenetrable, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Arthur's once unquestioned authority crumbled, and his carefully constructed empire began to disintegrate with alarming speed. Projects that were once green-lit with enthusiasm were quietly put on hold, then outright cancelled. Scripts he had championed were suddenly deemed unviable. His phone, once a constant lifeline to the heart of the industry, grew eerily silent. Calls went unanswered, meetings were perpetually postponed, and doors that had once swung open for him now remained stubbornly shut. His past transgressions, once conveniently overlooked or aggressively suppressed, now surged to the surface. Stories of his tyrannical behavior on set, his financial improprieties, and his ruthless exploitation of talent became common knowledge, fueled by a collective sigh of relief from those he had abused. The industry, ever eager for a new scandal, feasted on Arthur's downfall. He, who had built his career on intimidation and fear, now found himself utterly alone, isolated by the very tactics he had perfected. Dean Martin, meanwhile, continued his ascendancy. He never publicly gloated, never uttered another word about Arthur. His success wasn't built on someone else's failure, but on his own undeniable talent and the quiet strength he had demonstrated. His integrity, once questioned by Arthur, was now reinforced, shining brighter than ever. He was a man who understood the long game, who knew that true power lay not in ephemeral displays of aggression, but in unwavering character and enduring respect. Arthur, on the other hand, found himself in a gilded cage of his own making. His lavish mansion, once a symbol of his triumph, became a monument to his isolation. He would pace its cavernous rooms, the echo of his own footsteps, the only reply to his desperate thoughts. He clutched at the remnants of his ego, replaying the moment in the ballroom, the three words that had sealed his fate. He saw Martin's calm eyes, heard the quiet certainty in his voice, and a cold dread settled deep in his stomach. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones at industry parties he was no longer invited to. The once mighty producer, whose name had been synonymous with Hollywood power, was now a ghost, his career effectively over, ended not by a public outcry, but by the quiet, devastating truth of three simple words. His world had shrunk to the confines of his own bitter reflections, a stark and lonely landscape where the only view was the wreckage of his own making. The full extent of Arthur's career demise was not just confirmed, it was brutally, irrevocably complete. Dean Martin's career, far from being derailed by the producer's animosity, flourished in the wake of the incident. His legendary status was cemented, not merely by his effortless talent and magnetic stage presence, but by the quiet strength and unwavering integrity he displayed when confronted with malice. He had navigated the treacherous waters of Hollywood with a grace that few possessed, demonstrating that true power was not about dominance or intimidation, but about character and self-respect. He reflected on the confrontation, not with a sense of vengeful triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of justice served. It was a clear, undeniable lesson for anyone who witnessed it, that genuine respect earned through authenticity would always outlast the fleeting authority gained through fear. Arthur, the once feared producer, faded into obscurity. His name, once synonymous with power and influence, became a forgotten echo in the annals of Hollywood history. He was a cautionary tale, a grim reminder whispered among new generations of aspiring moguls about the perils of unchecked ego and the destructive nature of disrespect. His once bustling office remained empty, his name removed from studio lots, his legacy reduced to a footnote of failure. The industry, ever quick to move on, replaced him with new faces, new ambitions, and new dramas, leaving Arthur to stew in the bitter concoction of his own making. He became a recluse, haunted by the spectre of what he had lost, by the opportunities squandered, and by the indelible memory of those 3 words that had shattered his world. The lasting impact of the event on Dean Martin was profound. It solidified his personal philosophy, that one must always remain true to oneself, regardless of external pressures or the machinations of others. His public image, already beloved, gained an additional layer of admiration. He was seen not just as a performer, but as a man of substance, someone who stood firm in his convictions without resorting to the very tactics he abhorred. He embodied an old-school charm, coupled with an unyielding moral compass, a rare combination that endeared him to millions and ensured his enduring appeal. The contrast between the 2 men's legacies could not have been starker. Dean Martin, the epitome of cool, a man remembered for his smooth voice, his charismatic persona, and his genuine warmth, continued to entertain and inspire for decades. His name evoked joy, talent, and an effortless mastery of his craft. Arthur, on the other hand, was remembered, if at all, as a symbol of arrogance and ruin, a stark example of how quickly power can dissipate when it is built on a foundation of contempt. This incident served as a potent, timeless reminder of the true nature of power. It wasn't about the biggest office, the loudest voice, or the most aggressive tactics. True power resided in humility, in integrity, and in the respect one earned through consistent, dignified conduct. The long-term consequences of disrespect, as Arthur learned to his profound detriment, were devastating and irreversible. Dean Martin's quiet strength had not only prevailed, it had cemented a legacy of grace and authenticity that remains unblemished, a testament to the enduring truth that character ultimately defines a man far more than any fleeting title or temporary position of authority. His story became a whispered legend in Hollywood, a tale of how 3 simple words, delivered with unwavering conviction, could dismantle